should be aware of. It is a trend that is a fundamentally negative trend in the evangelical fundamentalist church in America at the present time. Sometimes the herald, that was his name, would make the announcements, and it would be, the king is arriving, go and welcome him. The enemy fleet has been sighted on the horizon, man the men of war. The games are about to begin. All proclamations. All proclamations, you see? And sometimes he would say, the ecclesia is in session. And then the most amazing thing would happen. Everybody would rush around shutting up shop. Philosophers would stop philosophing, or whatever it is that they do. People would stop drinking their Starbucks, and they would all start scurrying out of the agora till in no time or place it was practically deserted, and everybody seemed to be going in the same direction, and they would gather on a small hill, where the place where the Areopagites used to meet. The Areopagites, you try and say that in a hurry. These guys with the unpronounceable name used to meet there, and Paul met with them there as well. You remember? And when they met on this particular hill, all the citizens of Athens congregated together, gathered together, underline the word gathered. All the people gathered together became the ecclesia. The ecclesia. E-K-K-L-E-S-I-A. Ek means out of. Klesia comes from the verb kleroo, which means to call. The people of Athens, active in their normal activities, heard the herald speak. He announced the meeting of the ecclesia, and they all knew this. You stop dealing with your private personal affairs right now, and you come and you accept responsibility for the affairs of the community. The ecclesia is in session. And people were required, if they enjoyed the privileges of being a citizen of Athens, they were required to participate in the community concerns of Athens. There were always, of course, people who wouldn't do it. They were more interested in their private, personal life, and they didn't want to be bothered with commitment to community. And they had a word for those people. They were called, in the Greek language, idiotes, from which a very interesting English word is derived. An idiot, in those days, was somebody who was wrapped up in their personal lives so that they were totally removed from community involvement. When I was growing up in England hundreds of years ago, where mental health concerns were nowhere close to what they are in the Western world now, although much needs to be done still. Every village had what was known as a village idiot, somebody with mental problems. Why did they call him an idiot? Because he would sit on the outsides of the village, of the town, sucking on a piece of straw, saying inane things. He was part of the texture of the town, the village idiot. He wasn't part of the town. He was just a private person. That is why we have a word like idiosyncrasy. And idiosyncrasy is something very, very personal and very, very private and usually rather weird about an individual. The rest of the community isn't like it. Get the idea? And so here we have a word, ecclesia. You say, why in the world have you come all this way to talk Greek to it? This is all Greek to me. Well, I'll tell you why. Because ecclesia is the Greek word that is translated over and over and over again in the New Testament by the English word church. I happen to be old school. By that I mean, we are so enraptured with modern models of church. I have absolutely nothing against modern models. just so long as they are deeply rooted in the prototype of church. How it all began. And the way it all began, according to my Bible, which is an excellent book on the subject, it all began by God doing something very, very unusual. Do you know what it was? He started calling out ekleroo, ecclesia. He started calling out individuals to be part of a new community, the community of faith. Now, very interestingly, the Old Testament was translated into Greek in something we call the Septuagint. In the Septuagint, when it talks about God calling the people of Israel out of Egypt into the wilderness to worship him, and Pharaoh said, "Oh sure, I'll let them go," and then he reneged on it, and so God judged him, and then he said they gave him another chance. He said, "Oh sure, I'll let them go out into the wilderness and worship," and then he reneged on it, remember? And that finished up with the Exodus, a slaughter of the firstborn of Egypt, a dramatic deliverance of the people from Egypt, in order that they might be called out by God into the wilderness, that they might worship God and become a community of faith, the people of God, a holy nation. And they were actually going to have a unique piece of real estate. As Golden Maia says, that Almighty must have a sense of humor. He gave his chosen people a chosen piece of real estate in the Middle East, the only piece of real estate in the Middle East that doesn't have oil. That was where he wanted them to operate. So he called them out of Egypt through a mighty exodus. He called them out to belong to himself in the wilderness, in order that they might, through trial and tribulation, find their way into the land of promise, to be what? To be the people of God. The called out community. And you know the word that is used for the assembly of the people of God in the wilderness, in the Greek Old Testament? Ecclesia. That's where we get the idea from. And that is what the New Testament people picked up on. And they got hold of this fundamental idea that God is not just drawing individuals to himself, he is calling individuals to himself in order that they might be called out as a people, as a community, as a set apart, unique people. Why? Why did God want the people of Israel to be a holy nation? A nation set apart uniquely for himself. Why? Because all the nations around them were a total mess. They were a total mess. And God said, "You are going to be a people of God, and I am going to bless you." He promised Abraham this way back. And it wasn't just a case of the people of God were going to be gathered in order to be blessed. It was that the people of God were going to be called out, uniquely belonging to God, living as a community of faith. Because the communities of faith all around them were a disaster. And they needed not only to be blessed, but to be a blessing. This is what God promised Abraham. In you, all the nations of the world will be blessed. Now, why this emphasis on community in addition to the individuality of our relationship to Christ? Well, look back at the created order. Remember what happened in the created order? God started working, and there was formlessness and voidness. Spirit of God hovered over the formlessness, and form began to come out of it. And then, as form came out of it, he began to divide that which had formed, and then he would move on to another part of it, and that would be divided, and that was how he did it. that which did not exist began to exist, then was divided, and further things began to exist, till in the end the pinnacle of creation came out of what? It came out of the dust of the ground, and it was clearly related to the animal kingdom, and it was so created that it would thrive on vegetables. It was animal, it was vegetable, and it was mineral. And God breathed into its nostrils the breath of life, and it became soul. And mankind was born. The male variety. The male variety. There's something very odd about the male variety. It didn't have any femaleness about it. Everything else seemed to. Even the animal kingdom certainly did, and the plant kingdom certainly did. But humanity did. And God looked at all that he had created and he said, good, 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 very good, not good. Now this is a huge surprise to men, but not to women. But when God looked at part of the created order and said not good, what was he looking at? He was looking at man, the male variety. Don't misunderstand me if I call him the male man. There's a touch of humor there. It's British humor. You don't have to respond. I'm enjoying it immensely. The male man. So God said we need to fix that because that male man's not hacking it. So what did he do? He created female.
Amen.
Things have not been the same since. Now listen, look at this. When God created the male man, he created individuality. It's very straightforward. God and man and God. What could go wrong there? Then he created the female variety. And now it gets complicated. God and man and God, God and woman, woman and God, woman and man and God. Now the Irish understand this. If something can go wrong, it will. And it did. And nothing has been right since. It's called the fall. It's called the fall. God looked at his fallen humanity, and he saw it was manifested in two particular ways. For when God created man, he created individuality. When he created woman, he created community. When the fall came, individuality fell, and community fell. Two things that our world has to deal with every single minute of every day. The alienation of the individual, the fragmentation of the community. Look at all the problems that we have in America today. You can put them down to two things: the alienation of the individual, the fragmentation of communities and institutions. God created things just the way they were supposed to be. When the things fell, nothing is the way it ought to be. And then kicks in something called redemption, where God takes the initiative in a fallen world, intent on rolling back the consequences of the fall. That's what we call redemption. And when God looked at alienated individuals, he stepped in with a dynamic intervention called redemption. How does God deal with an alienated individual? We should know the answer to that. God deals with it by giving Christ to die on the cross, and says, whosoever will, may come. Every man, every woman, whosoever will, may come. For God so loved the world, that is humanity in its entirety. God so loved humanity in its entirety, that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. God's answer to an alienated individual is Christ. But we have two problems, not one. What's God's answer to fragmenting community? I believe the answer to that is church. Alternate community. Community of faith. The called out people of God who live differently, like Israel lived differently from the surrounding nations, so that the surrounding nations could see something of who God is and what God can do with a people. We know what he can do with individuals. What can he do with a community? What about Tinley Park? Is that a community? Has it got any problems? I don't know anything about Tinley Park, except the whole population is made up exclusively of sinners. So I would imagine you've got a problem of alienated individuals, and inevitably you've got a problem of fragmenting communities. Now here's the question. What is God intending to do in Tinley Park in terms of redemption? Rolling back the consequences of the fall. Alienated individuals, fragmenting communities. Well, I know what he intends to do. He intends to proclaim by word and deed Christ, crucified, buried, risen, ascended, ruling and reigning, and waiting until he presides over new heavens and new earth characterized by righteousness. That's what we proclaim, by word and by deed. But here's the bigger question. Not the bigger question, the other question. Here's the other question. What's God doing about the fragmentation of Tinley Park, wherever it is to be found? I know what he's doing. He's calling out a people for himself who live on the community level distinctly different from other communities. Other communities fracture and fragment at the drop of a hat. There's something unique about the community of faith. That's why you see it is so fundamentally wrong for people to think that church is somewhere you go, that if something bends you out of shape, it's somewhere where you quit going, or somewhere you sometimes go, or occasionally don't go. No, they need more than that. Tinley Park needs more than that. What it needs is the church being the church. Church isn't somewhere we go. Church is something we are. Nobody said what time I was to quit. I can go for hours. I mean, that, by the way, folks, is introduction. In fact, it's the introduction to the introduction. All right? All right, now I'll give you another 10 minutes. It'll seem more than that, but all right, well, that's sort of hopefully clearing some ground for you. All right, now let's look at the prototypical church. Prototypical church is the church in Jerusalem. You remember the day of Pentecost? Peter preached on the day of Pentecost. There was a remarkable visitation by the Holy Spirit in the proclamation of the word, and literally thousands of people came to Christ. It's called church growth. 120 of them in the morning, over 3,000 in the evening. Church growth. Now they've got a problem. What are we going to do with this? What are we going to do with all this? Well, we're told. Now let's turn to the Bible. Some of you say, when's this guy going to read his Bible? The answer is now. Acts chapter 2. Here's the question. We've got all these new converts. What are we going to do with them? Acts chapter 2, verse 42 answers the question. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe, and many wonders and miraculous signs were done by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. Selling their possessions and goods, they gave to anyone as he had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. That's where we started, folks. That's where we started. That's New Testament church. That's the first one. Always go back to the prototypical church. Be old school. It's very interesting that came up. And that was a cute comment, okay, if they live in a refurbished schoolhouse. Actually, this refurbished school, is that what you said? Yeah. You said it's a refurbished schoolhouse. I'll tell you the truth of it. The truth of it is we bought an old schoolhouse, knocked it down and built something else in its place. She calls it refurbished. Anyway, that's by the way. It's a matter of semantics, I suppose. It's very interesting. We got a letter just this week. Just this week. There's a ministry called Gospel for Asia. It is one of the most dramatic ministries in Asia. It's based in India, spreads all over Asia, and has resulted in tens of thousands of people coming to faith and thousands of churches being planted. We have the privilege of ministering in their training centers. Practically every year we go over there and have done for years. Founder of it is called K.P. Yohanan. He has a son called Danny. Danny is all set to take over from his dad in this huge ministry. He wrote to me the other day. And it was a very interesting letter he wrote. He said, "Can you please send me a reading list of all the stuff that you found helpful to you?" And he said, and can you send me a list of some of the books that you've written? And so I have a reading list. I just send it out when young pastors ask for it all the time. And Jill said, "Did you send him any of your books?" And I said, "No," because he said that he wanted me to give him a list of the books that I've read that have proved helpful. And frankly, I haven't read any of my books. I haven't found them helpful at all. But then he said, I'm so tired of the stuff I'm hearing all the time in the church in America today. He said it's the same thing, just being said over and over. And it seems to me that everybody is trying to be creative. And he said they seem to be just spending all their time and energy trying to think of different ways of getting a message out. And all the focus seems to be on style at the risk of substance. And then he said, "But you two are old school." He said the same thing. Now, I've never heard this old school thing ever, but it's come up 2 or 3 times this week. So I'm kind of getting the idea. That's what we are. But if by old school, it means, listen, put all the modern, put all the creative, put all the razzmatazz on one side and give back the picture. I'm old school. And if you want to know what the church is, then don't look at business and don't look at athletics and don't look at the military for your examples of leadership. Look in the New Testament. And if you want to know what the church looks like, look at the church in Jerusalem. And here, very simply, this is summary, and this is really where the whole study can now develop, if you want to, for you. I'll just give you a framework. The 2 key words in the church in Jerusalem were gathered and scattered. Gathered and scattered. Acts chapter 2 is all about the community gathering. From Acts chapter 11 on, you remember the persecution that came about Stephen. The result of that was the church scattered. The church gathered, the church scattered. Got those two? Say it after me. The church gathered. Say it after me. The church gathered, the church scattered.
The church gathered, the church scattered.
All right, one more time.
The church gathered, the church scattered.
All right, that's where you stop. All right, we describe what church is, the called out community, etc., etc. Of individuals who are alienated, that have been redeemed through the blood of Christ, etc., etc., find themselves in a new community. What does this new community do? This new community recognize what it is. It is the community of faith, the called out people of God, a holy nation, etc., etc., etc. That's who we are, placed in a geographical location. That's who we are. Now what we're going to do? We're going to gather, we're going to scatter. All right, now go back to Acts chapter 2. What did the church gathered do? Well, it says very, very specifically what this prototypical church did. Verse 42, they devoted themselves. That was attitudinal. Nothing casual about this. They said, hey, come on guys, we better get our act together. We are the called out people of God. We are the community of faith. We are the body of Christ in this geographical location. We need to get our act together. So they gathered with a spirit of devotion. To what? They devoted themselves to the apostolic teaching, 1, to the fellowship, 2, to the breaking of bread and prayer, 3. All right? Here are the 3 fundamental things that the church gathered does. The church gathers for discipleship. Apostolic teaching is discipleship. Always remember that God's call is to discipleship. That is his primary calling. He calls us to be disciples of Jesus. It means teaching, it means learning, it means walking, it means developing, it means imitating. In fact, the 3 key words of discipleship, a disciple is a learner, a follower, and an imitator of a teacher. That is what discipleship is all about. Who's the teacher? Jesus, through the medium of his people. All right? He teaches us the truth about himself and the truth about the Father, the truth about life, the truth about time, the truth about eternity. There's so much to learn, folks. All right? We learn and then we follow through. Learn, follow. If you learn and follow through, the net result is you become like your teacher, imitator. That is the triple thrust of discipleship. So they met for discipleship. Okay? Second thing they met for was for fellowship. Now, fellowship is a whole lot more than coffee in the foyer. I'm all in favor of coffee in the foyer, both before and after the service. You see? Take as long as you can to shoot the breeze and drink the coffee. That's great. Don't confuse it with the fellowship of the prototypical church. It says that they were together. They had everything in common. And it went on actually to a very, very extreme economic sharing. Some people have called it communism. It's not communism at all. Communism says what you got is mine. This early Christianity says what's mine, you got it. If you need it. Couldn't be further removed from communism. There were unique economic situations in the church at Jerusalem. One of them was, of course, that most of the people who were new converts in the church in Jerusalem had come up for the feast. So they were on vacation. They traveled from all over the Roman Empire. They'd come for the big celebration, the big feast days, mingled with the vacation, and then they were going to go back home. So when you go on vacation, do you take all your stuff with you? Of course not. So they'd all arrived there by the thousands. Thousands of them are converted. They haven't come prepared to stay there, but they hear that Jesus is gone and he's coming back. So they said, oh, well, he'll soon be back. We don't need to go home. And so they stayed, and they ran out of money. And then something else happened. it was well known in Jewish society that if you're a Jew and you died, the best place to be buried was Jerusalem, because Messiah eventually would come to Jerusalem and he would raise the dead. So the old folks who were on their last legs would make their final pilgrimage to Jerusalem, and they would rent some place in Jerusalem. So lots and lots of old people were dying, which tends to happen in Jerusalem. And as men, snuff it before the women do usually, because they have devoted themselves to looking after the pampering